Good day to all our viewers around the world. I'm Jojo Zaza, and you're tuned into DV Real News TV. Today, we take you inside a forgotten chapter of global decadence, a place once synonymous with opulence, scandal, and unrestrained indulgence. Hidden behind rusted gates and overtaken by nature, it now stands silent, a crumbling monument to power, excess, and secrecy. Welcome to what was once called a haven of hedonism, an abandoned seaside hotel with a past as provocative as it was mysterious. Once the playground of political elites, celebrities, and controversial global figures, including, shockingly, the former Iraqi head of state Saddam Hussein, this enigmatic luxury resort was also owned by none other than an American adult entertainment mogul, who built it as his own private empire of pleasure. In its heyday, the resort was unrivaled, a glittering palace built not just for relaxation, but for revelry. Reports from former staff and leaked guest ledgers describe scenes of daily debauchery that defy belief. Hundreds of kilos of fresh lobster served to sun-soaked guests, rivers of champagne flowing through marble halls, and a guest list so secretive and powerful, even governments were hesitant to speak of it. The hotel, whose name has been erased from public records, was more than a business. It was a symbol of raw influence, constructed by a controversial U.S. adult industry tycoon known for pushing boundaries both on-screen and off. Sources familiar with his empire say this resort was his ultimate fantasy made real, a place where no law intruded and every whim was catered to. Today, the once sumptuous site sits in ruin, the property, now overrun by weeds, shattered glass, and eerie silence. The air still clings to a strange scent of seawater, perfume, and secrets. This was no ordinary hotel. The architecture was baroque and flamboyant. Ornate golden statues lined hallways. Suites bore the names of ancient gods. Underground rooms, now filled with dankness and debris, once hosted infamous private gatherings. And in one heavily sealed chamber, documents suggest a secure vault once held tapes, photographs, and guest registries, all now missing. Investigative records and interviews point to a list of high-profile patrons. Among them, Middle Eastern strongmen, Eastern European oligarchs, Silicon Valley tech elites, and yes, Saddam Hussein himself. His visits, verified by flight logs and classified intelligence documents, were allegedly kept quiet by mutual diplomatic arrangements during the 1980s. Why was this particular resort chosen? Experts say it offered what few places could: total seclusion, absolute discretion, and the absence of surveillance. A global safe haven for powerful men to indulge, network, and escape scrutiny. It's unclear exactly when or why the resort was abandoned. Some say it was shuttered due to an international scandal that never reached the press. Others believe the fall of its owner, later investigated for financial crimes and racketeering, triggered its swift closure. What remains are rumors, forgotten records, and the skeleton of luxury long past. It was unreal. The wealth, the food, the people, it was like another world. But there were things we were told never to ask about. Rooms we couldn't enter. People we weren't allowed to see. Many of the locals we spoke with recall the era with mixed emotions. Some remember being hired at extravagant wages. Others recount whispers of exploitation, blackmail, and even disappearances tied to the site. Nothing has ever been proven. But the unease lingers. What's so fascinating about this hotel isn't just the luxury, it's what it reveals about unspoken global networks. This was a nexus where politics, money, and desire converged. The collapse of it, well, that tells its own story. The world has no shortage of lavish resorts, but few carried the mythos and the dankness of this forgotten palace. Today, it stands as a cautionary relic, a warning etched into stone and sea breeze. Power, when unchecked, doesn't just fade. Sometimes, it decays. A major geopolitical development is sending ripples across the international stage. The United States has officially announced that it is stepping away from its role as a central diplomatic broker in the ongoing war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. The decision, which comes after months of back-and-forth negotiations, marks a notable change in the U.S.'s engagement in the Eastern European conflict. According to senior officials, Washington will no longer act as a formal mediator between Kiev and Moscow, a move that signals both frustration and recalibration of American foreign policy. Sources close to the administration confirm that the decision to disengage was prompted by growing dissatisfaction with the lack of meaningful progress in peace talks, particularly Russia's refusal to commit to a comprehensive ceasefire. Despite numerous rounds of high-level dialogue, Moscow has resisted pressure to de-escalate fully, instead maintaining sporadic offensives along the Eastern Front. The U.S. State Department has clarified that while Washington remains committed to supporting Ukraine's defense and long-term sovereignty, it no longer sees value in leading negotiations that, in their view, have hit a diplomatic dead end. Analysts interpret this move as both a retreat from active diplomacy and a recalibration toward more strategic, long-term partnerships with Ukraine outside the negotiating table. Now, let's connect the dots to another critical development just days prior: the signing of a landmark economic and security partnership between the U.S. and Ukraine. Under this agreement, Washington pledged to invest in Ukraine's vast reserves of rare earth elements and critical minerals. These resources, essential for technologies ranging from batteries to defense systems, are now being positioned as economic pillars of Ukraine's post-war rebuilding. What makes this deal even more consequential is that it includes provisions that resemble security guarantees. While not a NATO membership, insiders say the deal functions as a form of indirect protection. By investing billions in Ukraine's critical infrastructure, the U.S. is effectively tying its own economic and strategic interests to Ukraine's territorial integrity. Some are now suggesting that this dual approach, reducing diplomatic exposure while increasing economic alignment, is the White House's way of protecting Ukraine without being entangled in an endless peace process. The decision has not gone unnoticed by other international players. European leaders expressed concern that without Washington's diplomatic weight at the table, any realistic hope of brokering a ceasefire may be further delayed. Others argue that the U.S. is simply recognizing the harsh reality. Diplomacy cannot succeed if one side is unwilling to compromise. According, Vice President J.D. Vance commented publicly this morning, saying, "The future of Ukraine must be shaped by Ukrainians. If peace is truly desired, it must begin with proposals that come from Kiev and be met with honesty in Moscow." That sentiment appears to underscore the administration's belief that meaningful negotiations cannot be outsourced or imposed. They must be homegrown and mutually driven. Critics of the U.S. move fear it could embolden Russia, which may interpret the diplomatic pullback as a weakening of Western resolve. However, U.S. officials counter that the opposite is true. Washington is done with symbolic diplomacy and is pivoting to real-world commitments that are harder to walk away from, namely, investment, defense cooperation, and resource security. Ukrainian leadership, while not publicly criticizing the shift, has acknowledged the increased burden of initiating its own roadmap for peace. President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to deliver a major address to Parliament later this week outlining what he calls a Ukrainian-led path to stability. International observers say the withdrawal of the U.S. from direct mediation could open the door for new players to step in, such as Turkey, China, or even the Vatican, which has offered in the past to host dialogue on neutral ground. At the same time, this may also set the stage for a more fragmented negotiation landscape, where regional powers pursue their own interests rather than a unified front. As the war grinds on into its third year, and with no ceasefire in sight, questions remain. Can Ukraine sustain momentum on the battlefield while forging a diplomatic solution independently? What role, if any, will the U.S. continue to play from behind the scenes? To summarize tonight's headline, the United States is stepping out of the diplomatic spotlight, ending its role as formal mediator in the Ukraine-Russia peace process. But far from abandoning Ukraine, it is doubling down in other ways, notably through economic alliances and resource-based strategic guarantees. As always, the situation remains fluid, and DV Real News TV will continue to bring you comprehensive, objective updates from across the globe. For DV Real News TV, I'm Jojo Zaza. Stay informed, stay critical, and stay tuned.